How's it going, guys? In this video I'll show you how to rebuild the turbo in your 2.0 liter turbo Hyundai or Kia. The first thing we need to do is to pop the hood to gain access to the engine. The next step, I recommend removing the engine cover. We can just grab on the corner and lift. And we'll set that aside. The turbo is connected to the exhaust manifold located on the back of the engine. It's hidden underneath these heat shields, so what we'll want to do is remove these in order to gain access. They are held on by a few 10mm screws. That's the top one. And the bottom one also has a few 10mm screws. I left one or two out of the bottom the last time I assembled this. So I'll just be removing this top one. We'll want to move this O2 sensor cable to the side. It's just pressed into place and held on by this heat shield. So you can see that if we just push up on this clasp, it slides out of place and it won't get in our way. We can then pull up and pull the heat shields completely out of the vehicle. Now we should have a lot more visibility and access to the exhaust manifold, turbo, and the wastegate. The next step would be to pull this elbow out of the way that connects the turbo to the intercooler. Kia used a different type of clasp, which I didn't like, so I just used some easier ones that I had laying around. Once this elbow is out of the way and we have better access to the wastegate itself, I recommend removing it. That way we can have better access to this hose, which connects to the side of the turbo. It's extremely difficult to get to if the wastegate is in the way, and it'll make things a lot easier when we're trying to remove the turbo as well as reinstall that air hose. The first step to disconnecting the wastegate is to remove this connector by pushing on the top here and pulling it out towards yourself. It might be a little difficult because dirt and debris may have gotten in there over the years and locked it in place. The next step would be to disconnect the arm on the back of the wastegate. The left side has a retaining clip on it, which you can pop out of place with a small flathead screwdriver and push in between the back side of the arm here and the clip itself. Once you push down hard enough, you should be able to make a gap, which will allow that clip to pop out. What I recommend is putting a cloth below here just so you don't lose it. The right side, however, has a nut on it, which also has a spring and a couple other small pieces. So if you were to take off the right side that's connected to the actual wastegate actuator, you risk losing a couple more pieces down in the engine. That's why I like to remove this left side. I'll put a small video clip up of me removing this from a different video. And that's where the rag comes in handy. Once the arm is disconnected, we can push it out of the way. And in order to remove the wastegate actuator itself, there are 3 bolts hidden back here on the back side of the turbo. Luckily, I have my old assembly here with the exhaust manifold turbo assembly, so we can see how this was all set up. Again, you can see here when removing the wastegate arm, there will be a small clip holding it in place right here for moving back and forth. Or you can choose to remove this 10mm nut. If you pop that out of place, again, there's a small spring here and possibly a washer. So it all depends on your preference and ease of use. If you can't get this side off, you know, you might want to try this side. Once this clip is removed, you can see how the arm will slide out of place, giving us free access to the wastegate itself. And the 3 bolts I was talking about that were hidden on the back side of the turbo are right here. It's 3 10mm bolts. Once these bolts have been removed, the wastegate should be free to be removed from the vehicle. Once that wastegate is out of the way, we'll see that we have all this extra access to this bottom air line. Again, it's located right here and goes below the wastegate into the side of the turbo. You can loosen the hose clamp with a lot more room, slide that out of place, and then we should be left with something that looks like this. The next step would be to remove the 17mm bolt that is holding this oil feed line into the top of the turbo. We can see it and access it from the top up here. And be careful because you probably will have some oil left in that line and it may drip, so just be aware that you might have some oil running around here once that line is removed. As a reminder, once the bolt is disconnected, the other end is still connected to the block, so be sure that you don't damage it by trying to force it out of position or out of the way. The next step, there's actually this oil return line that is connected to the bottom of the turbo itself. It's not very flexible, however it does have this kink in the middle. So be careful if you do remove this that you don't get it bent out of place or damage it by any way. And this is actually connected to the bottom of the turbo assembly, like such. So you'll probably want to get underneath the car. I had better luck just climbing up on top of the engine and reaching around this turbo block in order to remove those 2 bolts. You'll want to make sure that they come out evenly. That way you're not trying to cock it at an angle and stripping out any of the threads of the turbo itself. However, again, just like the last line, remember that this end is connected to the block. So if this falls down or you push on it, the actual line is going to bend and it won't line up again with the turbo. This was probably the hardest thing I had to line up again when reinstalling the turbo assembly. Once both of these lines have been removed from the turbo assembly, all that's left and holding it onto the exhaust manifold is a clamshell type clasp, which holds this portion of the turbo onto the side of the exhaust manifold with 2 bolts. I'll post a photo here showing you an example as I lost the old one. I recommend removing both of the bolts that are holding the clasp together. That way you can remove everything in 2 separate pieces. It'll be a lot easier than trying to move it out of the way of the turbo. Once that clasp has been removed, you can remove the turbo assembly by sliding it out of place. And here you'll see the Chra cartridge, which generally some of these fans on the inside or the outside could have chips, could be damaged, could be bent, that could be riding on the inside of the manifold. You could be hearing some grinding noises. And also on the inside of here, the clearances are very minimal, so you want to make sure that everything is quiet. There's no grinding, cuts, grooves, nicks, chips, anything like that. And now we have access to the Chra cartridge. You can see that the old cartridge is only held in here with a snap ring. So we need to get some snap ring pliers or some other type of device in order to compress this snap ring and slide it out of place to remove the old Chra cartridge and install the new one. Due to how wide the gap is of this snap ring, I recommend going with these 45-degree angle needle nose pliers, which you can get at your local hardware store. They're only a couple dollars, but these will actually open wide enough and give us enough power behind compressing this snap ring, as well as a large enough gap so that this will make the job a lot easier. I've purchased other snap ring pliers from these hardware stores that have the interchangeable tips or even solid tips, and they've just bent or they won't open large enough in order to get this snap ring to compress. So I highly recommend just finding these at your local hardware store for a couple dollars and purchasing these. It'll make your life a lot easier. What I recommend is you have an assistant help you with getting a small flathead screwdriver in between the snap ring and the housing to help pry up while you're compressing it with the pliers. This snap ring is quite large and thick, and it's extremely difficult, especially on a new one, to compress it and pop it out of place. And they don't give you a lot of room in between the CHRA and the housing. As you see here, the snap ring is almost as large as that gap. So what I recommend is taking the pliers, lining them up with the holes of the snap ring. Take your other hand with a piece of towel or rag or something and push on the top of the pliers to ensure that you're getting a good grip on that snap ring. And if they do slip and close, you don't pinch your hand or your finger. Go ahead and grab the snap ring, push down, squeeze, and you'll see the snap ring is closing, but again, it's quite large and it's difficult to compress to the point where you will be able to maneuver it out of that gap. However, if you do have enough flathead screwdrivers and somebody to assist you, you can get underneath that snap ring, make your way around, and it'll pop out of place. Once that snap ring is removed, there's nothing else holding this cartridge in place. This will all be removed as one unit. Both these fins as well as the center cartridge just slide out of place. When you have your new unit, you can buy one on eBay if you want to go cheap or get an OEM one. You'll just set it in place, align it. There should be a guide pin and a hole which this slides into place to make sure that the oil intake and oil return lines are in the correct location. Once everything is in place, you can then take your old snap ring, line it up with the lip. Again, it's very difficult to get behind the cartridge in between the housing, but once you do get in the lip, you can kind of work it into place and it will snap into place, locking this CHRA cartridge where we want it. Once the new CHRA cartridge has been installed into our turbo housing, we can then proceed for the reinstall. One thing to note is that there is a guide pin hole here on the cartridge, which aligns on the side here of the exhaust manifold. There should be a little pin. So when you're inserting the CHRA cartridge back in, ensure that that guide pin does align correctly. That way your oil lines will fit correctly into their location, as well as everything else is completely in place, and the two-piece clamp will go into place a lot easier as well. Once that guide pin is inserted in the right location, you can then put the clamp on it and lock it in place. And the next most important thing is to pre-lubricate the new CHRA cartridge by pouring some oil in the top feed line here and manually spinning the cartridge by hand through the air line here to ensure that everything is pre-lubricated. If you don't lubricate the assembly and you start the vehicle, it will take time for the oil to get to the CHRA cartridge, and in that small amount of time it will be running dry. So there's a large potential that this will overheat or some other internal issue will occur where you'll have to do this job all over again and replace that CHRA cartridge again. So be sure that you pre-lubricate this assembly before putting everything back together. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you could, please leave a like and subscribe.